The air was thick with tension, and every smile at the wedding felt like a dagger twisting deeper into my chest. I had walked away months ago, heart shattered, but nothing prepared me for the shock awaiting me at the altar. As I stood there, hidden in the shadows, memories of betrayal and heartbreak flooded my mind, and a plan that had simmered silently began to ignite. What was meant to be a day of celebration for my ex now held the key to a revelation that could shatter everything. In that moment, I realized revenge isn't always loud. It sometimes whispers, waits, and strikes when least expected. Sophie Carter stared at the envelope in her hands, her fingers trembling slightly as though the paper itself carried a pulse. She had not expected this, an elegant cream-colored invitation with her name written in careful, familiar handwriting. For a moment, she thought it was a mistake, a cruel joke sent by someone who didn't understand boundaries. But as she unfolded the delicate card, the words became unmistakably clear. It was from him, Ethan, her ex. The man who had left her heart in ruins months ago. The one whose betrayal had made every quiet night afterwards feel like a storm. And now, he was inviting her to his wedding. The initial shock made her chest tighten. Her mind raced, a relentless storm of memories and emotions clashing against each other. Ethan, who had once promised her the world, who had whispered dreams in her ear under starlit skies, had suddenly become a stranger. Yet here he was, asking her to witness him exchange vows with another woman. The thought alone made her stomach churn. She set the invitation on the kitchen table and sank into her chair, trying to steady the torrent of feelings threatening to overtake her. Anger bubbled beneath her skin, hot and unyielding, but beneath it lingered a quiet, aching curiosity. She needed to know. She needed to see him, even if it meant reopening wounds she had worked so hard to seal. Sophie's friends had warned her. "Don't go," they had said, each warning wrapped in concern and exasperation. "It's going to hurt too much. You'll just be walking into your own heartbreak." But Sophie couldn't shake the pull of it, that magnetic force that drew her toward the very thing she feared the most. There was something she had to understand, something that had eluded her since their abrupt and painful separation. She had replayed every moment of their relationship in her mind 1,000 times, searching for answers, questioning every word and gesture, wondering what had truly gone wrong. This invitation was more than just a piece of paper. It was a chance, however dangerous, to witness the truth firsthand. Days passed, and the invitation seemed to grow heavier on the table, almost as if it were demanding her attention. Sophie found herself imagining the wedding, the setting, the people who would be there, and most of all, Ethan. She pictured him standing tall at the altar, the same charming smile she remembered now placed on another's lips. The jealousy she felt was sharp, biting at her pride, but it was laced with an undeniable ache, a mixture of longing and unresolved anger that had never fully faded. She tried to push it away, busying herself with work, friends, anything to distract from the obsession building quietly in her mind. But every notification on her phone, every chirp of a message made her heart skip, wondering if the next note would bring further revelation. Sophie finally gave in one late evening, staring into her reflection as she traced the curve of her jaw, the lines of stress and sleepless nights still etched lightly on her face. Could she really do this? Could she walk into that room, where laughter and vows would mask the truth she so desperately sought? There was fear in her hesitation, fear that seeing him happy, or pretending to be, would shatter the fragile balance she had struggled to maintain since their breakup. And yet there was a stronger force urging her forward, a quiet, determined flame that whispered she needed to confront the reality of it all. That closure, in some form, could only come from stepping into the heart of the storm. She began planning, meticulously, almost obsessively. What would she wear? How could she appear composed, confident, and yet not entirely indifferent? She wanted to watch him, study him, perhaps even catch a glimpse of the guilt she suspected he carried deep down. Every detail mattered, from the dress to the shoes, from her arrival time to the way she would hold herself. Sophie knew that this was more than attending a wedding. It was stepping into a battlefield of emotions, a chess game where each glance, each word, could tip the balance between pain and revelation. The night before the wedding, sleep eluded her entirely. She lay in bed, eyes wide open, heart thudding against her ribs like a drum in a silent hall. Memories of their time together haunted her. The laughter and late-night conversations, the way his hand had fit perfectly in hers, the arguments that had ended in cold silences, and the final, devastating words that had ended everything. She felt a mix of anger and nostalgia that left her raw and exposed. And still, beneath the tumult, a tiny, stubborn spark of hope lingered. Hope that something unexpected might happen, that truths long hidden could finally emerge, that she might witness the man she once loved in a way that made sense of all the chaos. As dawn approached, Sophie finally rose, her reflection in the mirror revealing determination hardened with an edge of sadness. Today was the day she would walk into the past, stand at the threshold of a future she hadn't imagined, and face Ethan in a setting that would make every heartbeat, every tremor of fear, every flash of anger, matter more than ever. With the invitation tucked safely in her purse, she stepped into the morning light, not knowing whether she was walking toward closure, revelation, or a twist she could never have anticipated. The moment Sophie arrived, the tension in the air was almost tangible. The wedding venue, a sprawling estate bathed in golden sunlight, seemed to mock her nerves with its perfection. White roses lined the walkways, soft music floated through the gardens, and guests mingled with laughter and champagne glasses clinking, completely unaware of the storm brewing just outside their bubble. Sophie paused at the entrance, her breath catching as her eyes instinctively scanned the crowd. She could see him, Ethan, standing near the altar, his posture flawless, his smile charming, just as she remembered it. Yet something had changed. The air around him was different, heavier somehow, as though the secrets of the past had settled invisibly around him, wrapping him in an aura Sophie could almost feel. Every step she took toward the crowd was accompanied by a surge of conflicting emotions. Anger flared at the sight of him so composed, so seemingly happy without her. She could feel the jealousy prickling her skin, sharp and insistent, mingling with the raw ache of old wounds. Yet beneath it all, there was a deep, almost forbidden curiosity, a magnetic pull that she couldn't resist. She had to know what had changed him, why he had moved on so quickly, and what lay beneath that practiced smile. Her chest tightened as she imagined the ceremony unfolding, the vows being exchanged, the promises made, words she once thought were theirs, now spoken to someone else. Sophie found a discreet spot near the edge of the gathering, partially hidden behind a decorative arch, where she could observe without being noticed. From here, she could see every detail, the way Ethan's eyes occasionally flicked toward the crowd, the nervous tension in his hands as he straightened his cufflinks, the subtle hesitations that betrayed his composed exterior. She realized that despite the facade of confidence, there were cracks, tiny glimpses of vulnerability that only she, who knew him better than anyone, could recognize. Her heart raced as she tried to reconcile the man standing before her with the one she had loved so fiercely. The guests continued their cheerful chatter, oblivious to the storm brewing in Sophie's mind. She watched the bride, radiant and poised, holding a bouquet of white roses that mirrored the decor, and for a moment, a pang of doubt struck her. Was she really here for him? Or was she here for herself? To prove something, to reclaim a sense of power that had been stolen the day he left. The line between revenge and curiosity blurred as Sophie struggled to steady her breath. Every laugh, every exchanged glance, every whispered conversation carried a weight she could feel pressing against her chest. As the ceremony began, Sophie felt herself holding back a tide of emotions. The music swelled, and Ethan's voice, calm and measured, carried his vows across the garden. Sophie felt a jolt of recognition. Phrases he used, tones she remembered from long conversations late at night, the subtle humor hidden within the seriousness. Memories flooded her mind, and for a brief moment, it was as if they were alone again, the world outside shrinking to just the two of them. Anger, hurt, longing, and disbelief all intertwined, leaving her both paralyzed and alive in a way that made her pulse thrum wildly. Then came the small, unexpected gestures. Ethan's hand brushing lightly against his bride's as he adjusted the ring, a fleeting glance that seemed uncertain, almost guilty. Sophie's instincts sharpened, a whisper of intuition telling her that all was not as perfect as it seemed. The revelation she had unconsciously hoped for might be closer than she imagined. Her pulse quickened with a mix of fear and anticipation. She realized that her presence here was no longer passive. She was a silent witness to something that could upend everything, something that might reveal the truth hidden behind smiles and vows. Sophie's mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of the past with the scene before her. Each word, each gesture, each subtle movement became a clue, a thread she could follow to uncover the reality she had been seeking. And as the ceremony progressed, she felt a shift within herself, a growing resolve that this was not just about heartbreak, jealousy, or revenge. It was about understanding, about witnessing the truth, and about reclaiming a part of herself she had lost when he had walked away. Every heartbeat, every shallow breath, carried the weight of anticipation, the sharp edge of suspense, and the raw ache of emotions she had thought she had left behind. Sophie lingered at the edge of the crowd, her eyes fixed on Ethan as he moved with practiced ease among the guests. Every laugh he shared, every casual touch with the bride, felt like a punch to her chest. But beneath the hurt, a spark of determination began to ignite. She had come here not to cry, not to break down, but to understand, to see him for who he truly was now, and perhaps to confront the man who had left her heart in pieces. Every step she had taken toward this day had led to this precise moment. She couldn't turn back. Her fingers curled around the clutch in her hand, knuckles whitening as she tried to steady her racing heartbeat. She needed a plan, even if it was only in her head. She couldn't just storm up to him and demand answers. That would be impulsive, and she knew better. She had to be strategic, careful. She needed to observe, to find the right moment, to strike with precision if she wanted her confrontation to have the impact she imagined. But at the same time, she realized that part of her just wanted to step forward, to speak, to finally let the emotions she had buried for months explode. The music shifted, a soft, melancholic piece that accompanied the exchange of rings, and Sophie felt the tension in her chest tighten. She watched Ethan take the bride's hand, repeating words she had once heard him say to her, words she thought had been reserved for their love alone. Her throat constricted as a wave of old pain washed over her, mingling with anger and a strange, almost forbidden nostalgia. But amidst the emotional storm, she caught something, a flicker in his eyes, a hesitation that didn't go unnoticed. It was subtle, a brief glance away, a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sophie's pulse quickened. She knew that expression. She had seen it countless times when he was hiding something, when guilt or doubt had crept in. Her mind raced with possibilities. Was he truly happy? Was this facade of contentment masking the truths she longed to uncover? She felt herself moving almost instinctively, taking careful, measured steps closer to him while keeping to the shadows, blending with the crowd. Every movement, every adjustment of her dress, every careful glance around her felt deliberate, as though she were treading a fine line between discovery and exposure. She was no longer just a guest. She had become a silent observer, a detective piecing together the puzzle of the man she had loved and the secrets he now carried. The ceremony progressed, but Sophie's attention was entirely on him. She noticed the subtle stiffness in his shoulders, the brief clenching of his jaw, the way his hands fidgeted with the cuff of his sleeve. Every small gesture told her more than words ever could, hinting at the hidden layers beneath the polished surface. She felt a mixture of satisfaction and anticipation. Her plan was forming. Not an impulsive confrontation, but a controlled encounter. One where she could catch him off guard, reveal the truth, and perhaps reclaim a fragment of the power she had lost when he had walked away. As the officiant continued, Sophie took a deep breath, steadying herself for the moment she would step forward. She didn't want this to be reckless, nor did she want it to spiral into chaos. She had to time it perfectly, to speak in a way that would make him pause, make him confront the past as she had been forced to confront it alone. The realization made her stomach twist, but it also sharpened her focus. This was her moment, and she would not allow fear or hesitation to steal it from her. Her gaze met his briefly across the aisle, and for an instant, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. His eyes flickered, registering something. Recognition, surprise, maybe even a flash of guilt. Sophie didn't falter. She held his gaze, allowing the silence between them to stretch, to crackle with unspoken tension. She felt a thrill, a surge of adrenaline that made every nerve in her body come alive. This was the confrontation she had imagined countless times in the dark, replaying scenarios in her mind where she would finally have her questions answered. But she also knew that the moment would demand more than courage. It would require subtlety, precision, and emotional control. One wrong word, one misstep, and it could all crumble, leaving her exposed, vulnerable, and heartbroken all over again. She tightened her grip on the clutch, took a controlled breath, and prepared herself for the step she had been circling in her mind for days. The step that would bring her face to face with Ethan, the man who had once held her heart in his hands and now carried secrets that could change everything. As the ceremony progressed, Sophie's attention never wavered from Ethan. Each word he spoke, every movement, every glance seemed calculated. Yet there were tiny fractures in the carefully constructed facade he presented to the world. She noticed the way his fingers tapped lightly against the bride's hand. Not a gesture of affection, but of nervous tension, and the occasional fleeting look toward the guests, as if he were searching for something, or someone. Sophie's pulse quickened. She had always been able to read him, to notice the smallest of tells, and now, those familiar instincts were screaming at her that all was not as it seemed. The officiant's voice droned on in the background, blending into the soft music that filled the garden, but Sophie barely registered the words. Her mind was entirely focused on Ethan, piecing together the inconsistencies, the subtle hints of unease. She saw the way his smile faltered for the briefest moment when a family friend approached to offer congratulations. The tilt of his head, the forced casual laugh, it was all so painfully familiar. Sophie felt a shiver run down her spine. She knew him too well. She had spent months analyzing his gestures in her memory, replaying every shared glance and conversation, and now those patterns were emerging in real life before her eyes. A whispered conversation caught her attention. Ethan leaned slightly toward his best man, speaking in a hushed tone that seemed innocent enough, but Sophie caught the edge of urgency in his voice, the quick glance over his shoulder that betrayed worry. Her curiosity flared. What could he possibly be hiding on what was supposed to be the happiest day of his life? Her heart raced with anticipation and a growing sense of vindication. She had always suspected that the image of perfect happiness he presented to the world was just that, an image. Now, she was seeing the cracks appear, confirming what her intuition had known all along. As the bride and Ethan exchanged rings, Sophie felt her chest tighten. The moment was meant to symbolize unity and love, but to Sophie it highlighted tension and unspoken truths. She watched him slide the ring onto her hand with precision, but there was a subtle hesitation, a pause that spoke louder than words ever could. Sophie's mind raced, imagining every possible scenario behind that moment. Was he committed in heart or just going through the motions? Were there secrets hidden beneath his polished exterior? Things that only she, who had known him intimately, could detect. Her gaze lingered on him, analyzing every twitch of muscle, every shift in posture. Even the way he adjusted his collar seemed telling, a minor gesture, but to Sophie, it was loaded with meaning. She realized that the wedding, with all its grandeur and smiles, was a stage, and Ethan was performing a role. But every actor leaves traces, cracks in their performance, and she was there to notice them. The thought both excited and terrified her. She was walking a fine line between observation and exposure, between curiosity and obsession. The guests clapped politely, unaware of the tension that lingered just beneath the surface. Sophie felt herself becoming more attuned to the subtlest details, the way Ethan's gaze lingered a fraction too long in certain directions, the slight twitch of his fingers, the almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw. Each tiny signal fed her growing realization that there were hidden layers to this day, layers that would eventually reveal themselves, layers that could expose the truth she had been aching to uncover. Sophie's mind flashed back to the months following their breakup, the unanswered questions, the loneliness, the bitterness that had seeped into her bones. And now, here she was, in the midst of a celebration meant to signify joy and closure for someone else, but it was providing her with clues, subtle whispers of reality she had been denied before. She felt a thrill at the idea that she might finally uncover what had truly driven him to move on so quickly, what he had kept hidden, and perhaps why the man she once loved seemed so distant now despite the closeness they had shared. Every moment heightened her awareness, sharpening her perception until she felt almost omniscient, as if she could read not only Ethan's body language, but the emotions pulsing beneath the ceremony's surface. She realized that the wedding, with its smiles and vows, was a thin veil over deeper truths. Truths she intended to uncover. Truths that could alter everything. Not just her perception of Ethan, but her own path forward. Sophie's heartbeat quickened as anticipation built, the tension almost unbearable. She knew that the moment of revelation was approaching, and she could sense it in the nervous energy that surrounded Ethan, in the subtle fractures she had been observing, and in the way the day's perfection could never fully conceal what lay beneath. The ceremony reached its pivotal moment, the exchange of vows, and Sophie felt her chest tighten as Ethan began speaking. His voice, calm and steady, carried over the soft music, each word measured, each sentence carefully chosen. At first, it seemed like the perfect performance she had expected. Polished, precise, with just the right mixture of sincerity and charm to convince everyone around him of his happiness. But then something shifted. A pause, a flicker in his expression, and Sophie caught it, a tremor of hesitation, almost imperceptible but unmistakable to her eyes. It was a crack in the carefully constructed mask, a hint that something beneath the surface was ready to emerge. Sophie's pulse raced as she leaned slightly forward, straining to catch every word, every subtle nuance. And then it happened. A confession, whispered so softly that most guests didn't hear it, slipped from Ethan's lips, though directed toward the bride. His tone was loaded with guilt and regret. A confession Sophie had never anticipated. Not about her. Not in these words. Not at this moment. He admitted a secret, a hidden truth that cast the entire relationship in a new light, exposing betrayals, mistakes, and decisions that Sophie had long wondered about. Her mind reeled. The words echoed in her ears, surreal, almost impossible, yet undeniably real. Sophie felt a strange mixture of emotions surge through her. Shock, disbelief, anger, and a flicker of vindication that she hadn't expected. She had come here prepared to confront Ethan herself, to wrestle answers from him directly. Yet here, in the middle of a room full of strangers, the truth was spilling out in a way that both surprised and unsettled her. The realization struck her. This confession, public yet private in its subtle delivery, was a turning point, a revelation that could alter everything she thought she knew about him, about their past, and perhaps even about herself. Her mind raced to piece together the implications. Each word he spoke seemed to peel back layers she hadn't seen before, exposing hidden motives and concealed truths. Memories she had buried suddenly resurfaced, taking on new meaning. The arguments, the silences, the subtle behaviors she had questioned for months, all of it suddenly fit together in a way that left her reeling. The shock was visceral, a punch to the stomach that left her momentarily breathless. And yet, amidst the chaos of emotion, Sophie felt a strange clarity. For months, she had replayed their relationship in her mind, analyzing every word, every gesture, trying to understand why it had ended the way it did. Now the confession illuminated parts of the puzzle she hadn't been able to solve on her own. The truth, revealed in a voice trembling with honesty and guilt, gave her answers she had sought for so long, but it also opened a door to new questions, ones that demanded reflection and careful consideration. Sophie's gaze was locked on Ethan, observing his subtle shifts, the brief flickers of vulnerability he attempted to hide. She could see the conflict within him, the tension between the life he presented publicly and the hidden realities he had carried privately. It was a revelation that left her simultaneously empowered and unsettled. She realized that the day, the wedding, and even her presence here were all pieces of a larger narrative, one she was now beginning to comprehend with startling clarity. The confession continued, carefully threaded with remorse and admission. Sophie could see the weight it bore, the way it hung in the air between them, invisible yet palpable. The bride's face reflected surprise and confusion, and Sophie felt a pang of something she couldn't immediately name. Was it pity, relief, or a subtle form of triumph. She wasn't sure, but she knew that the moment marked a dramatic shift in the story, one that would forever alter the dynamics of their past and the understanding of the choices that had led them here. Sophie's hands clenched subtly at her sides, her mind a storm of emotion. Anger and betrayal mingled with fascination and anticipation. She realized that this confession, delivered so unexpectedly, was a turning point she hadn't fully anticipated. The day's proceedings, once seen as mere spectacle, had transformed into a stage for truth, and Sophie was at the center of it all, watching as the man she had once loved revealed parts of himself that had remained hidden for months, if not years. Each word, each nuance of his voice, each subtle glance carried weight. Sophie understood the significance of what had just been admitted. It was more than a casual slip. It was a revelation that demanded acknowledgement, reflection, and perhaps even a reckoning. The shock coursed through her, but beneath it, a calculated clarity began to form. She would need to navigate what came next carefully, to process, to respond, and to decide how this newfound truth would shape her actions, her emotions, and her confrontation with the man who had once held her heart.